let's get stuck in. We have to talk about the big game, the point-taking game from the Seagulls. Brighton 2-2 Chelsea. It's the second time that Chelsea have dropped points this season after coming from behind to salvage a draw against Brighton. I mean, Rach, what did you make of this game?
I was surprised. I think Chelsea obviously are incredible this season, and I think when they're not playing well or teams look like they're causing them problems, they're able to find a way to win. Like, I was at that game against Everton where they scored a goal in injury time to win it, and I felt like it was going to be another one of those games. Equally, coming up against a Brighton who have looked a little lost since the beginning of the season, maybe since the end of last year, and looked a little bit uncomfortable in the setup and the style of football they've been playing. It wasn't the game I thought Chelsea might lose points in. However, I think the Brighton that came out, I was so impressed with their work rate, their discipline. They actually looked so confident in the type of football they'd been told to go out and play, which is all the more impressive when you're coming up against a Chelsea side, to be that confident in your setup. And I also, you have to factor in that, like, Chelsea obviously had Gurma starting, which was super exciting. It allowed them to play that back three that Sonia Bonpastor has wanted to play. But it did mean that essentially they'd just come back from international break, throw in a brand new defender into the mix, and you're playing three at the back, which maybe you haven't exactly done all that often. It's probably not wholly surprising that they looked uncomfortable in defence at times. And I just think Brighton were really smart about how they capitalised on that. And also the welcome return of Fran Kirby, and it just shows what an asset she is to that side.
I think, obviously Baltimore got the first goal in the 16th minute. It felt like, it was, as goals go, what an unbelievable volley. There was absolutely nothing the keeper could do about that at all. But it really felt like Brighton kind of like grew into the game more and more and built confidence. There was some amazing link-up play between Onisalaga and Paris. It looked kind of initially like the goal could have been offside, but it wasn't on like further reflection. And like the angle of that goal, like getting it into like the near corner, I thought was absolutely incredible. But I do think Hampton probably should have done a little bit better with that second goal.
One thing I'll say on that is the last time I went to Brighton, I shot from essentially the left of Hampton's goal, and the bloody sun setting, and that would have been a 3 o'clock kick-off as well. Absolutely ruined my photos shooting at the goal just because the sun was like directly. So I can imagine her reactions were like a second off just from that glare.
Well, because she was so close to the near post, I think in her mind she thought that she'd had that covered, and the only way there was going to be a goal scoring opportunity was to go to her left-hand side and kind of, or like cross it in. So I don't necessarily blame her, but like not having that near post covered, that is a rookie error for me. That wasn't the only opportunity that Brighton had. I kind of felt like Kirby, I thought, was completely spicy. Could have had probably a couple of goals herself, to be fair. Through on goal, it felt like at points Chelsea were just picked apart, maybe because they were playing that kind of back three, and it was allowing more gaps to open up at the back. But I was just so impressed with their form. And then the second goal, Vicky Losada slotting home from that close range F, I just thought, like Brighton, that was that kind of start of the season spark that I saw like back in them again.
Yeah, and I really respect actually that at 2-1 up they didn't try and sit back on their laurels and rest on their laurels, which many teams can be forgiven for doing when you're in the second half against Chelsea and you're winning. Everton may be a little bit guilty of that as well, thinking they could hang on for the draw. And especially against a team like Chelsea, even when they're not playing well, the game is not done. Unless you've got yourself a bit of a cushion, the game is not done against a team like Chelsea. And I really respect the fact that they were pushing for a third goal and arguably could have and deserved a third goal, I think. I love the link-up play, like Keats. Madison Haley's a bit of a revelation this season. She's really grown this season. The more minutes she gets under her belt, the better she looks. It's just that, like, I was just admired the confidence of them within their style and what they were doing and in the way that they were attacking up against, the champions.
We've already kind of like touched on this already, but like we did have, and we kind of preempted the question in a way. Listener Harry asked us on Instagram, can you please discuss how brilliant Brighton were yesterday? P.S. Love the pod. Keep up the great work. This is now Brighton being unbeaten in their last 8 home games. And we touched on Nikita Paris there, but she's now the 5th player to register 100 plus goal involvements in the WSL. Do we think this is kind of a sign of things to come for Brighton, kind of finding that form again and ending the season super strong.
I think it'll be a really valuable performance for them to remind them that they can be confident in the style that Dario Vidicic is trying to get them to play. I think they started the season really well, and as teams started to figure them out, and obviously, of course, I think Fran Kirby's injury was a big part of it too, but as other teams started to figure out what they were trying to do, they became less confident in playing the style, but also, having a plan B, if you like. So I think for them to have that performance, have Fran Kirby back in, and to go back to the drawing board and say, this style does work, we can play it well, when we do it well, it's really effective, is going to be massively beneficial for them, because it's the games in and around them as well where I think they should have been picking up points and haven't been, and could we kind of thought a little bit maybe the wheels were coming off their season a touch because they'd started so well. I remember thinking we were going to have a massive gap from 5th down to the rest of the league, and now that gap has closed, and while they're still in 5th, they're only a point ahead of 6th position, and the gap has actually opened up above them. So for Brighton, it's been so beneficial for them to just remind themselves what they can do, how this style can be effective, and I think maybe gives them that little bit of confidence. They've got players who are feeling confident, which I think is going to mass them too.
Definitely. I think, talking of players who felt quite confident initially, it was a very unfortunate start for Chelsea's Naomi Girma. Obviously, making her debut didn't quite go to plan, forced off through injury just before the hour mark. Thankfully, Sonia Bompasta said it doesn't look too bad, but we will need to have a scan. So, not ideal for her sort of coming back into things. She's obviously been sort of patiently waiting for her debut while recovering from a calf injury anyway, and then sort of just having to be withdrawn just before the hour mark. Obviously not ideal for a Chelsea that still has so many fixtures left to go, obviously still fighting on all fronts in the competitions. Not great, but what did you make of her from the sort of things that you were able to see in that first 60 minutes?
I don't think there's any need for panic or worry. I think it's entirely understandable to come into a team not essentially fresh. You've been out injured. You're coming into an established team that has already had so many games under their belt into the season. Add to that, you're in a new league you've not played in before, and then on top of that, a new system. So it's not like the players around you could be like, don't worry, this is how we normally do it, like we've got this bit covered because we're so used to being in this style. It felt like they're all a bit like, where am I supposed to be? In terms of what
Sonia threw her into, it was like a lot of different variable factors all changing at once.
Here's the deep end, I hope you can swim, bye. So I think it was entirely understandable. It's going to take a little while to find her feet. I hope that niggle she felt was just that, a niggle, and she's got a bit worried and thought not worth the risk. There's depth on this bench, there's no point in risking. I just hope it's not a reoccurrence of what she just come back from.
No, definitely. And sending thoughts and love to Naomi Girma. We obviously really want to see her playing consistently in the WSL week in, week out. I feel like we've just had a glimpse. Yeah, we just had a glimpse of things, and now you're gone again. But when you come back, you'll be fighting fit and stronger. That is the plan. Talking of a Chelsea kind of trying to fight and carry on through a season which it feels like it's quite long. It's getting longer, and there's so many fixtures left to go. Obviously, Chelsea now unbeaten, 15 games in a row. But this kind of felt like, okay, they are human. The gap is smaller. The 5-point gap now between Man United, who sit on 36 points, and Chelsea on 41, which now looks so much more reasonable. Do we feel like actually this has created that, not the jeopardy, but the kind of the drama that we needed to make sure this league still felt competitive and that there was something still to be fighting for, and Chelsea weren't running away with things, and it wasn't going to become one of those, well, I suppose we'll just fight for the Champions League then and that'll be it. Do you feel like there's hope now that things might not be as wrapped up as we thought they were? Maybe
a little bit. I think
I'll say a lot. Go on.
Two results seem an awful lot less than 3, right? It's just one more result, and it's happened early. So you think, okay, we've got a little bit longer to go, or potentially, they could slip up. And we talked about this before about where there are potential slip ups, and it's often not in the places you expect. What I also thought was really interesting, and almost a bit of a theme across some of the results this weekend, or the performances this weekend, was coming off the back of the international break, particularly for a City and a Chelsea and an Arsenal still in Champions League, knowing they've got a lot of fixtures this month. First game back, managers having to manage loads, consider what's priority, the teams they're playing, and I think Arsenal, City and Chelsea all struggled. And I just thought that was really an interesting theme across the board, because I think nearly all managers touched on the fact that they've just come back off international break. And I just think that's really interesting, because they know now they've got this. I think Gareth Taylor was saying something like 8 games, maybe it was Viv Miedema post-match, like 8 games or something in the next few weeks. And I think most of them for Man City are against Chelsea. But I just think like it's an interesting one for managers to have to juggle. And I think we saw that as well with Sonia wanting to bring Naomi in, give her minutes, have her as an option, play her against a team they thought maybe they should be able to beat. And then potentially now she's come out with an injury, and that's another injured player for Chelsea that they need to juggle and then figure out where to like balance the play, because there's midweek matches for both of these teams now as well, that you have to factor in. So I just thought that was a really interesting kind of theme that I picked up on across this weekend.
I think it's that, isn't it, now? You've got these kind of back-to-back games of not only the sort of tournaments, but the WSL League games. You've got Chelsea obviously in Champions League, FA Cup, Subway League Cup. Man United obviously have the benefit of kind of not being in the Champions League this year. And then that kind of 5-point gap starts to feel a little bit like it could fall into Man United's favour if some of the fixtures...
It's an opportunity.
It's 100%. It's like the door has opened slightly. Like it's slightly ajar. There's a cool draft coming in that Man United...
It's a Katie McCabe angle. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, for sure. It's one of those.
If you get a ball in it.
I think that's going to be the thing, isn't it? But I mean, they face each other in the league at the end of April, which will be a super interesting fixture. I mean, that could theoretically be a bit of a decider, depending on how the games go in the meantime. I mean, I'm trying to create more drama, right?
Yeah, but I think for United, all they need to focus on, and it sounds easy, just keep chipping away, keep getting your wins, even if the performances aren't amazing and maybe not as comprehensive as you would expect. Even with, arguably some of the difficulties going on internally, they need to just keep chipping away, getting the wins, and not thinking too far ahead and not thinking about that Chelsea game. Because if they don't get all the wins up until that Chelsea game will mean nothing, essentially, really. So focus on what's in their hands and just go quietly about their business like they have been, because those other teams have a lot more to think about, arguably. And, I was saying to Gareth Taylor, like, you're back down here against West Ham on Wednesday night, like, would you not just stay down? And he was like, it's a really difficult one to decide. Like, the players have just come back off international break. They're going to want to be home for a little while. Where are they going to train? All that kind of stuff. And he kind of touched on the fact that, like, in March, obviously they have Chelsea 4 times, but they're going to then have to play Brighton. So on one of those games, they're like, okay, maybe this time we will stay down. And because that's another thing you have to factor into all of these, is the travel and everything else that kind of comes in with it. So I think Manchester United, can have the benefit of just being able to focus on themselves and nothing else really, and just keep focused on what they're responsible for and what they're able to kind of control.